So, what if a school wasn't just a place for learning? What if it was an act of defiance, or even a weapon in a cultural war? Today we're going to dive into the story of the world's very first folk high school. And this is an institution that wasn't born in some peaceful, quiet era. No, it was created as a desperate act of cultural survival.
Our guide for this whole story is this incredible source, a book that covers the first 150 years of the rotting folk high school. It's a fantastic chronicle of conflict, big ideas, and just unbelievable persistence.
And really, it all boils down to this one huge question. Now, this isn't some abstract philosophical puzzle. For a group of Danish-speaking farmers back in the 19th century, this was a real, urgent, everyday problem. Their language, their identity, their whole way of life was literally being erased. And their answer was to build a school. To really get why a school was their weapon of choice, we have to go to the front lines of this cultural war. So let's set the scene. We're in the early 1800s, in a deeply contested border region called Schleswig.
Okay, take a look at this map. This was the Danish composite state at the time. And you see that central peninsula right there? That's the Duchy of Schleswig. Linguistically and culturally, it was a total battleground. Technically, it was ruled by the Danish king, but it was also hugely influenced by the powerful German Confederation just to the south. And this situation created a really stark power imbalance. You see, Danish was the language of the people, the farmers, the language you spoke at home. But German was the language of power. Law, government, the courts, the educated elite. If you wanted to get anywhere in life, you had to speak German. Danish was getting squeezed out of public life, big time.
So in the face of all this cultural pressure, a totally radical new idea for education starts to bubble up. It was an idea not for the elite, but for the common people, and it was championed by this hugely influential Danish thinker, N.F.S. Grundtvig.
And this slide just lays out how revolutionary his idea really was. Grundtvig looked at the existing system, which he called the Black School, and thought it was just deadening. It was all about memorizing dead languages like Latin and Greek, and it was only for the rich. His vision, the folk high school, was the complete opposite. It was all about the living word. The Danish language, their own history, their songs. The whole point wasn't to train your memory, but to awaken your spirit.
The philosophy itself was so powerful. The people needed to be awakened to their own culture, to their own history. But, how? How do you actually turn a philosopher's beautiful idea into a real, physical school? Especially in a place that's hostile to the very idea. And this is where the hero of our story steps onto the stage. See, this movement needed more than a philosopher, it needed a fighter, a man who would go on to earn the nickname Knight of the Mother Tongue.
And here he is, Christian Flor. Now this guy was a Danish professor at the University of Kiel, which was deep in German-speaking territory. He read Grundtvig's writings, was completely inspired, and dedicated himself to taking up the cause. He was going to be the one to turn this dream of a folk school into an actual place with walls, teachers, and students.
Flor was more than just passionate. The man was a brilliant strategist. He came up with this incredible four-step battle plan. First, mobilize the farmers, because he knew the demand had to come from the people themselves. Second, head to Copenhagen and get the money from skeptical city elites. Third, find and buy a farm to house the school. And finally, navigate all the politics to get the king's official approval. I mean, this was a masterclass in making an idea happen.
And so, after all the planning, the fighting, the fundraising, the day finally arrived. The culmination of a struggle that had taken years.
November 7th, 1844. You gotta remember this date. It's not just the opening day of some small rural school. No way. This is the birth date of an entire educational movement that would eventually spread all over the world.
And we don't even have to imagine what it felt like to be in that room, because we have this incredible, raw account from Peter Skål, one of the very first students. When you read his words, you can just feel the electricity in the air. This was so much more than a school opening. It was this powerful, defiant statement of hope.
And there it is, rotting Højskole, a simple collection of farm buildings, right in the middle of this contested land, transformed into a fortress of Danish culture, the physical embodiment of a philosopher's dream and a professor's fight.
But, and this is a big but, if you think this is the happy ending to the story, you'd be wrong. So wrong. Opening the school was one thing. Keeping it open, well, that would prove to be another bottle entirely. The victory party didn't last long.
Because reality set in almost immediately, and it was harsh. The school was drowning in debt, and after all that effort to rally the people, get this, only 20 students showed up for the first term. The headmaster they hired was so overwhelmed by all the problems that he quit after just 6 months. And to top it all off, the local farmers, the very people the school was built for, were slow to actually give it any financial support. It was a perfect storm of problems. Just let that sink in. By the summer of 1845, less than a year after its huge, triumphant, emotional opening, the world's first folk high school was about to close its doors for good. The dream was dying.
And so the man who started it all had to make the ultimate sacrifice to save it. Christian Flor, the knight of the mother tongue, resigned his prestigious, secure professorship at the university. He moved his family to this struggling, debt-ridden farm, and he personally took over as headmaster. He put his entire life and career on the line just to keep this vision alive.
Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. You know, it's one thing to have a brilliant, world-changing idea. We all have ideas. But what does it really take for that idea not just to be born, but to survive its own difficult birth and actually endure? The story of Rotting, it shows us that it often takes more than a dreamer. It takes a fighter, someone willing to sacrifice absolutely everything.